I'm Travis Weaver, and you're listening to the Good People Project.
All right, let's do it. Negative stories get headlines, but there are a ton of good and decent people stepping up to serve an elected office. The Good People Project tells the unsung story of those who wake up every day to do good and selfless work for the American people. With new episodes out every Monday, please share this episode with friends and family to help spread our positive message. Today's guest is a one-of-a-kind candidate for state representative, given that he's already served as a state rep from 2007 to 2015, but he's back for more. He's known for being strong on legal issues, given he earned his Juris Doctor from Valparaiso and served as Will County Assistant State's Attorney. He's running for a seat that was the closest race in the state in 2022, but he's upseated a Democrat seat before, and we're confident he'll do it again. So, without any further ado, the wise and talented Dennis Reboletti. Dennis, how's life?
Well, it's been busier than ever, and Travis, thank you for inviting me on the podcast. It's nice to be associated with a positive message and doing positive things for the community, because way too many times we see people who, when I talk to them about public service, they aren't interested in it. And it's very sad that the next generation of people who are thinking about it look at it and go, wow, you're going to attack my credibility, my reputation, my family, and is it really worth it? What else can I do with my time? So hopefully, between your podcast and people like yourself that currently serve, that you bring the next generation of young people out that want to do right by their communities and do right by the state of Illinois.
Yeah, I appreciate saying that. And you kind of hit on, the whole reason why we put this podcast together is there's going to be tough mailers that come out. Dennis Reboletti's a MAGA radical extremist. And the reality is you're an extremely moderate candidate that fits a district very well. And so hopefully some people hear this, and when the negativity comes, they can say, well, I've never met him personally, but, I know he's a dad. I know he's been involved in business and a public servant. So hopefully this just kind of helps people get to know Dennis Reboletti, the person, not necessarily the person that they make you out to be, which is wrong.
Right. So over the years, I've been attacked on everything you could possibly imagine. I've been called anti-senior, anti-veteran. As a matter of fact, I was called anti-veteran when my stepson was in Afghanistan between 2010 and 2011 in combat, and I took great offense to that. I've been called anti-student, you name the thing, and that's just what the normal stuff is. And so my job as the candidate is to overcome that with the right message, which is, this is the reason I'm the better candidate to serve this particular district. And I always find it funny, my son Zach, who is a senior at Florida State in civil engineering, notice that he doesn't have any interest in politics. Mm-hmm. Always asks me the question, he goes, Dad, why is it that people don't value experience in politics anymore? And I said, I don't understand it either, because you want somebody in any profession that has the experience. And the only way you can get that is by doing the job. And so hopefully the conversation in the 45th district is going to be about, is the state going in the right direction? Am I that right person to advocate for the issues that are most important here? And it's a 99.9% DuPage County district. Do I have the temperament? Do I have the knowledge and the experience to go back to Springfield and do the job for the people of the district?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I've really, I think, valued experience more since I've been down there. I think about my job as a state rep kind of in three different buckets. The first bucket is Travis Weaver, the campaigner. The next bucket is Travis Weaver, the legislator. And then the third bucket is Travis Weaver, the person who works to serve his district on constituent issues. And, as a campaigner, experience certainly helps. As a legislator, experience certainly helps. But I think where it probably helps the most is how you serve your district. How are you getting roads patched? How are you helping your local nonprofits get a hold of grants? How, when somebody calls you with a question because, they've been waiting 12 months to get a license done or for the EPA to sign off on something, can you get that job done quickly? And there's certainly a learning curve where, somebody might vote how you want them to, but if you have a pothole in your front yard, maybe they're not the right person to get that done. And so I think experience really helps in that third bucket. But also in the second bucket, you might say, I want candidate A because I think that they vote just like me. But the reality is, it's not about finding somebody who votes just like you. It should be about finding somebody who asks the right questions and gets the right answer. Because in a republic, we find people that we trust that go serve us. We don't just say, hey, I want you to do ABC on these three bills, because there's usually a lot more complexity to a bill than just what meets the eye.
Of course. So you have local issues that are very relevant to the district where you're directly impacting the district. One of those things is the 294 construction that is one of the borders of the district. And then you have things that are more global. Something that's happening in your district is something I have to be aware of and understand. And how does it impact the people of the 45th district? And if not, what would they think is important for the greater good of the state? And so you learn very quickly that Illinois is a huge state. It's very diverse geographically and demographically, and you have to get up to speed on a number of issues. And you also want to go out and seek the people on both sides of the aisle that have expertise in farming, banking, the business community, the legal community, the energy community, because you're going to learn a lot on the job, and you also want to be able to listen to people's floor speeches that are talking about an issue, and you trust their judgment and acumen. So it isn't always partisan. And I think the other thing, the experience that I bring, is that I've lived in this district and in the county and in Elmhurst all of my life. So I've seen the changes from DuPage County being more of a rural place when my parents moved here in 1967. And I see it where it is today, where my son just graduated from York High School, where I graduated from, and how he went out of state to Florida State University, where it is cheaper for him to go out of state than it is to go to U of I and major in engineering. So I think those are some of the bigger things you take a look at. You have that institutional knowledge and wisdom, and that's something you have to also have in the General Assembly, and I don't know if that's valued as much anymore.
So before we get too far to this, I just kind of want to take a step back. So you're a dad, you're an attorney, you've done state rep before. What are some other things, though, that you like for the voters to just know about who you are? So, person as a legislator.
Yeah, I've lived in the district all my life. My wife and I raised my son, Zach, there. I have 3 stepkids, which have given me 5 grandchildren, ages 3 to 11. 2 of the boys, Noah and Wade, had their first day of kindergarten in the last couple of days. So hopefully they're doing okay with that. That's a major change. I attended, after graduating from the public schools here in Elmhurst, I went to Eastern Illinois University, where I majored in political science and worked on my master's degree there. And before I finished that, I ended up in law school at Valparaiso University. From there, I continued in public service. I was an assistant attorney general under Jim Ryan back in 1998. It was my first job out of law school. And I represented the state of Illinois against Department of Correction inmate lawsuits. So inmates complained about frozen toilets, poor medical treatment, failure to protect them from other inmates. So I was in state and federal court representing them. Working on one of those cases actually brought me to Will County, where I was working with the prosecutors down there on a case out of Stateville. And I had a conversation with the prosecutors there, and they asked me if I was interested in coming to prosecute there. And that's how I ended up down in being a prosecutor in Will County. While I was there, I worked my way up from traffic all the way up to felony courts. I did drug court. I've worked on gang crimes, gun crimes, multi-jurisdictional task forces, grand jury. So I've pretty much seen it all, worked on prosecuting sex crimes. So I've had a lot of experience in the public sector, from the prosecutorial and governmental representation. When I went to Springfield in 2007, obviously at that point, I won a district that was held by former Speaker and Leader of the House, Lee Daniels. And it's Northeast DuPage County, and it had a district that hadn't been tested for about 20 some odd years. And it was a new drawn district. And at that time, the Iraq War was going on. And what was thought to be a very safe district ended up not being a safe district. So I won my first race by about 300 votes, and there were recounts and challenges. So I'm very familiar with close districts and districts that are about as purple as can be. And from that, in the next cycle, we ran in Barack Obama's first term, and we actually moved our numbers up.
Wow. Nobody did that year.
No. So we held the seat. We went from 300, winning by 300 to winning by 900 votes. And then we went from there in 2010, we won again. And then I got redistricted, because what you can't do at the election box, you can do with the pen, right? It's mightier than the sword. But throughout that time in the General Assembly, I was asked by House Republican leadership to really focus on criminal justice issues. So I served on a lot of those committees and task forces and worked with both sides of the aisle to draft concealed carry legislation and to be a kind of a point person working on all of those issues from prison reform, criminal justice reform. And one of the things I actually passed was a thing called Andrea's Law, which is the first ever first-degree murder registry. And it was based out of a case out of Eastern Illinois, where my staffer went to school also. And the individual was paroled after serving 12 years, and he was moving to Hawaii. And they said, what can we do? What is the opportunities for us to do something? He can't obviously serve more of a sentence. He had murdered a girl named Andrea Boulay in Eastern. And as he was moving out, who doesn't know where this person's at? There's nobody to keep an eye on him. So we ended up creating this registry, and it's a national model, and it was the first of its kind. But at the same time, I think some of the other bigger picture issues you want to look at from a representation is right now I'm a township supervisor in Addison Township. We focused on, you name it. I've done infrastructure improvements on a building. I've worked on helping those who are homeless, have utility needs, and we've also grew our food pantry out, and we're providing food to 600 families a week during COVID. And now we've transitioned and we're working with our new mental health board to provide funding and counseling for the disabled community, for substance abuse and alcohol abuse, as well as helping with mental health issues. And so I think we're looking to be a beacon in another issue that the state doesn't do enough work in. So I've enjoyed public service and serving the people. And I think one of the things you've led to in talking about being a young person, when I first ran for office, I ran as a write-in candidate for alderman in the second ward of Elmhurst while I was taking my final exams at law school.
It's got to be kind of wild to look back on. I mean, it's been almost 20 years since that first campaign.
That is correct. And so when you start out with these things, you never think that you're going to continue on that path. But I grew up in a household where both my grandfather and father were union printers. They worked at the Elmhurst Press, where I actually worked with them. And they talked about the family all the time. We used to have dinners on Sundays, and they talked about working people and middle class. And I don't think they would realize they were creating a little politician. I wasn't going to be a printer, even though I worked in it. I thought I was going to, but my mom said she did not want me to. But you take that work ethic and you take the conversations and you talk about the issues of the day, and you're like, how do I help out? What's my role? And I think one of the things is that I've really enjoyed representing the people, and it's more of a passion and a labor of love. And it's like what they talk about, if it's not work, because to me, it's something that I get up and I look forward to doing. I don't look forward to getting attacked, and that's coming. But I do look forward to
thick skin.
You have to have thick skin. So
I can hear the Chicago accent.
That's right.
You got thick.
I do. And I was raised by people that were very tough people and didn't take anything and aren't afraid to give it back when they need to. So I'm not going to be pushed around, and I'll take the punches, and I'm going to protect myself and protect the candidacy. But ultimately, it's about good government. It's about providing a different viewpoint. And it's about doing the right thing. And I think that's what's going to lead us to victory in the 45th House District.
So speaking of bills you passed, I saw the first bill you passed in 2007 was to reclassify salvia. That's a pretty big undertaking for a first bill, especially as a freshman. So how did you come across it? What made you want to do it? How did you get that across the finish line? I mean, I can't imagine that was a simple one.
Well, interesting enough, it helped me get a Wikipedia page out of all things, because the people that didn't want it banned created a Wikipedia page, and I was being attacked. It's still out there. But my then seatmate, Chapin Rose, who's a former prosecutor, came up to me. He knew that out of about 4 to 5 years of being a prosecutor, I was a narcotics prosecutor. He goes, I've been working on this for a while. What do you think about taking this bill and see if you can pass it? And so one of the first things you learn is that you don't realize where opposition is going to come from in the State House and what corners of the world. And next thing you know,
it's so funny. You'll be like, this is a great bill, no brainer. And then all of a sudden it's dead. And you're like, who the hell is killing my bill, and why won't they tell me that?
Why are people interested in this? And so I was receiving phone calls from some families who said that their child had died from it because of hallucinations. They jumped out of a home or a building. And so you start to get the different perspective on things. And then you have people who then believed that it had therapeutic value. And so then people are attacking from the other side. And so I think having been a narcotics prosecutor makes it a lot easier. You understand from the human side and you understand from the prosecutorial side as to what are these drugs doing, why is it such a big deal? And when you go back in time to 2007, that is when the drugs like this were really starting to become more mass-produced and trying to avoid prosecutions. And I was able to use my experience, build the coalitions, and use the expertise of being a prosecutor to help get that across the finish line. But at the end, I didn't have a lot of some people weren't happy about it, but that's okay because my son's friend told him it was pretty cool that his dad had a Wikipedia page. So we did create that. Yeah, exactly. So that was it. I mean, so then after that, you undertake other things and you build that confidence. But
yeah,
it was a big undertaking, and sometimes you don't realize how big it is until you're halfway into it.
Yeah. So I guess thinking back to, so you ran in 06, sworn in 07. So over the last 18 years, and I'm sure Madigan's probably the biggest change since then, but are there just some things that you notice that are just different about the assembly or the culture that are just going to be to get used to?
What I missed out on was the term, now that we have people who are billionaires that run the government, from Governor Rauner to now Governor Pritzker, and you have this endless supply of money. Now, Speaker Madigan always had an endless supply of money in the races, and I was always outspent. And spending doesn't guarantee the result. That has changed, and so you have a lot of the top down. And my understanding is that the collegiality or the people's interactions from both sides of the aisle is different now. And I don't know how that culture has changed, but there used to be a lot of interaction and people knew one another on both sides of the aisle. So it was more, you knew about them and their families and you talked about stuff like that, where it isn't always about whatever House Bill 3426 was. So I hope that hasn't changed, but if it has, I'm somebody who wants to get to know the people. And if I can work with you, great. If I can learn more about your district and your issues, great. And if not, that's okay as well. But I think part of it is we forget that elected officials are human beings. And they're just not something that's like, it's a punching bag. But Art Turner, who is a former representative,
great guy.
And I serve with his son as well, who I know they lobby.
So I think I know Art Jr.
Yes.
And I think I might have met Senior once, but I know Junior pretty well, and he's just a wonderful.
Yeah, both very excellent people, and learned a lot from Senior. And he came up to me one day, and the House floor was out of control. And you know how it's very chaotic there sometimes towards the end of session. And he had talked about, I was talking like, well, this is where this come out of nowhere. And he said, people have been down here, they miss their families. There's stuff going on in their personal lives and their home lives and their business lives. And there's all these other things that they're sacrificing. And sometimes it just swells up and you kind of forget about the humanity of what the people are trying to accomplish. And I think that's where during the election, we just become these imaginary beings that can be attacked and anything is said doesn't really bother you. But the end goal is can you do right by the people? And I think you have to be prepared to learn from people on both sides of the aisle. And those are some of the people that I went to for learning about how to pass a bill, how to maintain floor decorum, how to react to certain things and be measured in your response.
I think you hit on two really good things. The money really is an issue. I mean, you look at Governor Pritzker, spent $350 million since he started down this journey 6 or 7 years ago. And, I like to see the best in people, but the reality is when somebody writes you, a state legislator, a judge writes you a multi-million-dollar check, and then they call you and say they need you to be yes or no on a bill, there's just no way that doesn't weigh into you. Even if you try to get it out there, it's just hard to go against people that helped you on that large of a scale. And I do think that that's a problem. But, one thing I will say about the culture of working across the aisle, I think you're exactly right about the human aspect, and people are people. And, one thing that I came in pretty nervous about being, downstate, Christian, gun-owning, farm kid, am I going to find people across the aisle that I can even speak the same language as and relate to? But you work hard, you treat people with respect, you have integrity, you never can risk your word. And pretty quickly, I would say within the first 45 days, I found people across the aisle that said, this guy is somebody at least that you can work with, you can trust. And, you have a beer with somebody outside of the chambers and they realize you as a person. And, I also think that, our colleagues across the aisle appreciate when you bring them concerns about a bill that they have when it's legitimate concerns, because they want to pass good bills, and they don't want to pass bills that after they pass it, we're taking shots at them about the misfalls of their bills that are legitimate issues that they never got ironed out. And so I've found that, if you can come up, point something out, a lot of times they'll appreciate it. Sometimes they might even change it. And if they don't change it, I think as long as you're coming with, good intentions, that they're fine with it.
Yes. And one that you asked him about how things have changed. And I was just thinking about the fact that there aren't moderates anymore in both sides, right? I've watched a lot of my Democratic friends that I serve with have lost, who have been replaced by extreme beliefs and progressivism. And I think what is different now is that when you were looking to pass a bill in the House, you could work with downstate Democrats. There aren't really many of them left, right? There was more of a moderate if you were Democrats from Evergreen Park and the south suburbs. You would find more of a Catholic moderate base there. I know that has changed. And we had a lot of moderate Republicans in suburban Cook County, and now most of them are gone. And when I served, there were 12 or 13 Republicans from DuPage County representatives. So you see the big difference. You're serving with 40 people right now. When I started in 2007, we had 56 House Republicans. So every bill, could rise or fall with just a couple of people moving back and forth. And I think that's where divided government serves its people the best.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that we definitely have less moderates than we used to. But I also think that there's a lot of people on the other side of the aisle that actually want to be moderate. The hard thing is when they have 70 votes, that they can vote no, and it's still going to pass anyway. So I think there's a lot of them that are feeling like, I wouldn't mind being a no on this, but I'm not going to be a no and watch the bill pass. And now I'm an outcast within my caucus because I voted no for no reason. I think if we could get those numbers a little bit tighter so that it's not 40 of us, 78 of them. They could have just about a quarter of their caucus vote no and all of us vote no, and the bill still passes. I think if we can tighten that down, there are members that I think could be happy to join us on some issues, but they're not going to join us for no reason.
And they're also afraid of a primary.
Right.
And so they've watched other colleagues leave because they weren't left of left. So what does that mean? Well, that means now I'm more worried about a primary than I am worried about governing, because what I used to think was a safe Democrat seat, it might be, but now I have to look at who is going to be in my rearview mirror that's going to take me out. Right. And so when you govern at the extremes, this is what happens, that everybody else in the middle, which is one of the major reasons I decided to come back, is that you don't have anybody saying, okay, well, a lot of other people live here in the middle. And they just want to understand, why is everything so far to the left or so far to the right? And I think now they're looking for people that are able to navigate somewhere in the middle. I know that a lot of people don't like the term compromise, but you have to be willing to compromise, because getting something done in legislation or for your district is better than getting something than getting 100% of nothing. And so there are some people, you have to understand what hills to die on. And every bill isn't the most important bill, that if you lost that vote, you have to get up and understand that there's another bill to vote on. And I think that's where my prosecutorial experience comes in. Working in a courtroom with public defenders, you might win one case and then there's another case and another case. And so just because you lost this bill or a vote doesn't mean you don't get up and continue forward with that. So I think that the need and the urgency is to get people that want the state of Illinois to live within its means, to be a place that they're proud of, that they want to retire in, which most people that I know are planning on getting out as soon as possible, and that a place that, as they grew up in, their kids, like my son, if he so chooses, will come here, be a civil engineer, and want to stay in Elmhurst or in the region, Or he may choose to leave because, again, the economy isn't as good and enticing as our neighboring Midwestern states.
Yeah, you raised a good point just about compromise, because there have been a handful of bills that I was a yes on, and then I'll go home and people will say, why the hell were you a yes on that? And first of all, I appreciate when they ask me why, as opposed to just throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there's oftentimes maybe a bill will start off, in my opinion, as a D, and if I can get it to a C plus or even a B minus, and that means I got to be a yes vote on it because I was part of the negotiation. Maybe I wasn't over the moon about being a yes, but you kind of got to go if you're going to compromise. And I think a lot of times it's important for folks to understand. Sometimes we'll vote on things that we're not jazzed about because it's about making it a better bill than it used to be.
That's right. And so one of the things I think the most important part is your ability to ask questions either in committee or on the House floor. And you want to be, because I used to tell people, because I was a floor leader on behalf of the caucus and in leadership, is that you can either talk to me now or you can talk to me on the House floor. I'm going to ask you the same questions and you might win, but I want to still extract the information out that my caucus needs and that everybody needs to understand the legislation. And again, if you don't get 100%, so what? We don't get 100% of anything, and we don't get 100% agreement in our own household, so I'm not expecting to get 100% agreement with 117 other people, but you're going to have to find some type of common ground. There's some bills are the hell no, I won't vote for that, and that's fine. But there are some that you go, wow, it's a better bill than where it was, and at least I'll take some credit for making it better, even though I don't 100% agree with it.
Yeah. I always tell people, if you want to have a representative that's 100% with you, you better run, because the only person who's going to be 100% with you is you. So if we can be in the 90s that we're on the same page, that's pretty good.
And if you look at a district like this, I used to tell people, when you wake up in the morning, 40% of the people in your district may not like you right away. And so it's not about that. It is about what are you doing that day to understand what's happening in the district and what is going to do the best for them, and then ultimately in the big picture. And if you're not thinking about that, then you're not doing your job. So figure it out, put your best foot forward, and engage on behalf of the 10,000 people that you represent.
Yeah, I think a lot of times moderate can kind of be a four-letter word, especially if you're in a partisan primary. Whereas for you, there's several issues that you're pretty moderate on. And I'm just kind of curious, do you mind the title being a moderate Republican? Or are there times you're like, hey, what the heck? I'm pretty fiscally conservative. I'm not that moderate.
Well, I always laugh because when I went to Springfield, I thought I was a pretty conservative person. And obviously I wasn't, according to my Democrat colleagues and my Republican downstate colleagues. I wasn't far enough right to my downstate friends. And then the Democrats thought I was reasonable, and they thought I was moderate compared to somebody other that were more conservative than me. And so I look at myself as more of a pragmatic conservative, a governing conservative. And I tell people all the time, campaigning and governing are two different things, because now that once you win, you have to now pass a budget. You have to prioritize things. You have to have the capacity to say, what is the priority for the district? What's the priority for the state? There used to be lines of people outside my office. I always said, if you're not there to ask, then somebody else will ask a priority for spending. And at some point, politics is the art of the possible, but governing is we have finite resources, who's going to get them? And right now, we don't have finite resources, but we still have to govern and pay bills. So I think that in a bigger picture, you'll see more of a moderate perspective here in the suburbs. And so you have a lot of people here that are more socially moderate or liberal, but they're more fiscally conservative. And that's where I think the party here hasn't always evolved. And while sometimes there's a purity test, and I would tell people there are 10 votes you can take. I've taken thousands of votes, right? And so the Democrats know that because they just spent $10,000 to do opposition research. And so you have committee votes and amendment votes and House ballot votes and speeches and everything else. And they're trying to digest all of that, right? And so you're thinking to yourself, well, where do I go? Where do I go next? What's my issue? And so again, when you go back to, is it 40%, 50% of the group deal with you? You're looking for people who identify like you, right? They see myself, my family, and say, they're like me, right? I'm a small business owner. I have my own law practice. I work in the community. I represent the community. My son went to school in the community. Do I understand what they're going through every day? And so maybe I don't always agree, but I think one of the issues you're getting to is I was pro-life and now I'm pro-choice. And I've seen the issue here, and it's more from what had happened after Roe it wasn't one of the, there are some people that's the most important issue to them. And as a legislator, the social issues really weren't something I was as concerned about. But I saw some of the more conservative states were doing and how they were treating people regarding getting an abortion and dealing with doctors. And I just said, I don't go this far with that. And so I would say my position is such that I went from somebody who supported with exceptions, but when you get down into more of the legalisms of it, and when a person, the woman has the right to choose, I don't want to be the person that's there in the doctor's office with them trying to make that determination, and a doctor saying, yeah, we need to do this, but I don't know if I'm going to be sued. So I've evolved on the issue. People evolve on issues. As a matter of fact, I listened to or read a quote from Governor Pritzker, and he was talking about Senator Durbin. And Senator Durbin was a very pro-life candidate when he first started out, and he's evolved. And I found it interesting that if a Democrat evolves on an issue, it's wonderful. If a Republican evolves on an issue, then we need to, that's part of the problem.
I mean, look at Kamala.
Yes, she evolves by the minute. She's the borders are, she's not the borders are. She's for healthcare for all, and she's not. So over time, you see the world differently. Your perspectives change, and so it's changed for me. People can say it's Johnny come lately, but it's just where I'm at today in my life, which is different than where I was when I was 38 years old. So I think over almost 18 years, I think I have the right to decide where I'm at. If the Republicans agree with it or don't agree with it, I can appreciate that. Again, I'm more in the middle way of, hey, I'm going to govern. Hey, the social issues aren't as important to me. But trust me, I will be attacked as a pro-life candidate. When I ran for Senate recently, they spent $5 million, $1 million per week to play an ad that said I hated women. And that if I was elected, if you thought I hate women now, wait till I got to Springfield to take away all the rights of women. And we're not talking about just abortion rights or reproductive rights. They made it sound like I was going to take away people's licensure and make them second-class citizens. I said, so this is where I'm more of from a moderate, I'm fiscally conservative. I would say from that perspective makes me more moderate on the social side. But I don't find social issues to be the thing that should drive the state of Illinois. It should really be governing back to the basics.
Yeah, well, and I mean, that's the whole point of the podcast is that mailers and flyers are going to come and say your one thing, and hopefully the folks that are listening today get to know really who you are and where you stand, and maybe agree, maybe you disagree, but then at least you're making a call on the facts, and I think that's important.
I agree, and I think that's the opportunity is you don't get to have conversations like this. It's more about, here's this vote you took in 2008, and this is where you're at. So I live somewhere in the middle. And it's also, as you know, in Springfield, it's hard to live in the middle.
Yeah.
Because you have both sides get angry, right? And so you'll see me be attacked on guns, even though I've taken more guns off the street and prosecuted more violent offenders than anybody else in the General Assembly. That won't matter because, as I've given floor speeches before, I said I don't want guns in schools, but you'll put the mail piece up, and I've had those. Well, my son was in grade school. The same thing with the pro-life and pro-choice. These will be the issues that are not the most important issues for most voters. And in this district in the state, what is the number one issue? It's the economy, it's inflation, it's everyday issues.
I got to imagine property taxes in this area are just crippling.
You're at about 2.5% of the home value. And you can't trust Springfield that if you were trying to figure out a better funding system from property taxes. So what's one of the things I want to take a look at is how do you properly fund schools without heavy reliance on property taxes? But as you know, and you saw this last budget and you sat there, as they always drag out 15,000 pages at 4:00 in the morning, that, oh, here's a new $1 billion in spending so that we can still cobble together 60 votes. Well, you have 78 people. And the speaker always likes to say 78 is great. Well, I disagree with them. 78 isn't great. 78 people caused another $1 billion in spending on things I would think most people in this district and the state do not think is a number one priority, especially when they're dealing with eggs that are now $4 a dozen that used to be $2. I was shopping with my wife the other day, Jewel, and she goes, "Can you grab a pound of bacon?" And I'm like, "You got to be kidding me. It's $6 a pound. It's $8 a pound." And not that it's new to me. It's not the first time in the store, but when you start to think about it, that changes a family's dynamic, and not everybody has the extra $3 plus what pop costs and everything else. And so now a trip that used to be $200 to the grocery store for 3 or 4 people is now $500.
Yeah.
That's a real number.
It's pretty wild. I graduated Alabama 2015, and I remember my last year of college. I was a broke college kid, and I would live off of like Progresso soup and toast so that I had some beer money on the weekends. And I remember, because I was paying for it, I could buy a can of Progresso soup for 89 cents. And just about 2 weeks ago, I was walking through the soup aisle. I don't, fortunately, buy a lot of canned soup these days, but it was, I think, $2.09. And I'm like, this is well over double what it was just a decade ago. And if I was a broke college kid now, I'd still probably be living on soup and ramen. But that's a wild amount of inflation in a 10-year period.
Sure. Housing costs are up. Utilities are up. Grocery prices are up. It's choking everyday people. It's choking people of all means. And what are you going to do about it? Well, the thing that Illinois shouldn't be doing is adding more spending.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't sustain it. So at what point, and I believe that there's a tax hike coming in veto session, lame duck session, before the new year starts, because they cannot help themselves. There's never enough. And as more people leave, as you see unemployment rising, you have less people to tax, you have less businesses to tax, you have less wealth to tax. People are changing their spending patterns, but you can't keep asking them for more when they're not making more.
It's so interesting. At what point do we start to realize that our elected officials are causing the problem, not fixing the problem? Especially being here in the suburbs, look at the city and the problems that Lori Lightfoot caused. And what do they say? Oh, well, it's because she's not far enough left. We better go for Brandon Johnson. And now hopefully people open their eyes and thinking, man, if we went with that Vallis guy, things would be a lot different around here.
Right. I have my brother-in-law lives there with his wife, and they voted for Vallis, and they're liberal Democrats, but they understood, and they're talking about moving out of the city. So the policies out of Chicago definitely impact DuPage County and the Collier counties, because there is a synergy between the two. It's not just Chicago by itself, and the suburbs. People go to work in the city. They work for companies that are based out of there, and vice versa. And so we're all attached. You have O'Hare Airport here, which is one of the major airports in the world. So you have all the infrastructures here, right? You see all the interstates that are here. You have one of the largest railroad areas here, and you have in Will County, you have Elwood. So you have one of the largest inland ports here. So this is really the crossroads of America. What are we doing to leverage that? Instead of saying, what can we do to tax it and then spend it on other priorities, expanding healthcare to non-citizens. And so do you now, where does it end? What's the right amount of money? When I started in the General Assembly, I think the budget was in the high 20s or low 30s. And where are you guys at now?
53
billion. So $20 billion in less than 20 years.
Yeah. I think JB's first year, it went from it was 34. Now that kind of went down because there was a rounder budget impasse. So, but I think it's gone up from 34 to 53. So 40% from 18 to 24. That's an explosion. That's not a sustainable number. And you're right about, we got to ask ourselves, is the point of an economy to figure out what's the most that we can grift on it without killing it? Or is it point of economy to say, how much can we pull off to support the people who need help? But the goal being to grow the economy, because we know that a high tide raises all boats.
Right. The goal of the state is to provide public safety and education. Everything else is secondary if you go and look from a constitutional perspective. Yes, we provide Medicaid in that we are judged by how we treat our most vulnerable. And yes, we should provide Medicaid for our residents. We should be there for the disabled community. We should be providing the best schools from all levels, from pre-K all the way through PhD. We want to focus on that. The other social agendas are not something that Illinois should be as vested in and providing us to be one of the most liberal places in the world. I don't think the average person is as liberal as its government.
Well, I mean, just look at our last governor election. I am friends with Darren Bailey, respect him a lot, but he was probably never going to be a candidate that was going to do well in the city and suburbs. And then on the other side, you've got Governor Pritzker, who outspends him 16-1, spends hundreds of millions of dollars, and is only able to scrape together 54% of the vote. I mean, by no means is that a landslide. And we didn't have a candidate who was going to do great in the city and color. And he outspent him 16-1, and the best you can do is 54. I think that just proves that Illinoisans, I'm not saying that we're in the majority, but to say that we're more than, 55-45, I think is just really misreading the people of the state.
And it shows in the gerrymandering, which you see here in DuPage County, as Speaker Welch's district now has a good chunk of DuPage County. That is designed to chill the voice of the voters who should be in compact and contiguous districts. Look at my district. It's a little bit fatter towards the top where I live in North Elmhurst. Then it gets skinny around South Elmhurst and Oak Brook, and then it took a lot of Oak Brook out. Why? Because it's a Republican stronghold. That's not a surprise. And then it cuts part of Hinsdale, which is a Republican stronghold, and adds other precincts here and there. They know what they're doing, and it's the long-term. So should they have 78 seats? No.
Yeah.
Speaker Madigan never wanted that many,
exactly.
And he understood that. But now when you draw the map, you've actually, so when we talk, this conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion does not include moderate people. It doesn't include representation, because equity would mean to me that we should have 59 Republican seats, 59 Democrat seats, but you don't want diversity of opinion. You don't want an equal seat at the table.
Right.
It's what I'm going to tell you is what you need to digest. And so to me, to make things more inclusive, you need different viewpoints. And I don't have an issue debating with somebody from the far left or far right. I just want to get to the best policy there is going to be out there. I want to be able to say, hey, I can have the debate with you and after go out and have a beer with you and have dinner, versus I don't like you because of where you live and your policy and whatever. That's not how it should be. But when you take 78 seats and you want more, what's the purpose of that?
Right.
What's the more going to do?
What haven't you passed that, you can't because you don't have 80. I mean, you got 78, you need 60.
Right. And so then you change the dynamic of the state and how it's governed. So you still need diversity of opinion. You still need to include, and we talk about inclusivity, you still need to include every voter. So every Republican voter shouldn't only be counted on to pay for taxes only. And if we don't like what we have to say, too bad. So everybody needs a seat at the table. And so I think that's where you need those diversity of voices to come in to help craft policy that makes sense from Cairo all the way up to Rockford. I mean, we have to change the dynamic here, and it has to go one seat at a time.
Yeah. And when you hear the Democrats talk about, threat to democracy, man, I hope the Illinois Democrats take their own advice, because you look at our gerrymandered maps and how little of a voice we give such a large amount of our population. That ain't democracy. And when you pass bills to kick candidates off the ballot because you're trying to change the election mid-cycle, which the Illinois Supreme Court just threw out, that's not democracy. But when I think about,
or when a presidential candidate never got one vote for president, and now they're
Exactly.
they're one election cycle wave. So the hypocrisy is extremely rich, isn't it?
Yeah, I think people are seeing the gaslighting, and I think it was worth a bump for a while, but you can't fool people for that long. You can fool people for a time period, but once they start to open their eyes, now they just feel like you lied to them. And not only does it not help you, I think it really starts to work the opposite direction.
Well, how much is enough? When is enough enough? And so part of that enough is enough should be on the reverse side. And I think the average voter and the average resident in the district wants to be left alone. They want to grow their business. They want to take care of their family. They want to go to work. They want to make a fair wage. They want to raise their families and have government do what it's supposed to do. Its basic tenets, not be involved in every part of their life. And when you talk about that, and when government does that efficiently, then you're doing your job. When I'm trying to micromanage everybody's life, like some of the folks want to do, then I think you go far afield of where we should be as a state.
Speaking of good government, are there a couple, really effective leaders that you've seen that you want to take this next term after? I'm sure you've had multiple governors, probably different minority House leaders. Are there some things you've kind of picked up along the way that you've seen, wow, so-and-so did this, it was effective. That's the kind of leader that I want to be in this next term.
I think it is a culmination of personal experience and then the professional experience. I talked to you about Art Turner Sr., who I had a great, profound amount of respect for. I worked a lot with Lou Lang previously, who's now retired from the General Assembly from Skokie. He was on leadership on the other side, and we would have a lot of conversations about things. I actually served with Speaker Welch, and I obviously this is business. I like Chris. He's a good guy, family guy, but at the same time, we have business to deal with here in the district. I learned a lot I grew up in a political organization in Addison Township where I had the chance to learn from Henry Hyde. I had the chance to learn from Pate Phillip, who's a former Senate president who just passed. I replaced former Speaker of the House, Lee Daniels, and Attorney General Jim Ryan. So these are the people so I've seen very conservative, and then I've seen more of a moderate base. And I also was able to work with, I learned a lot from Governor Quinn. You could like or dislike him or agree with his policies, but when I would sit in his office, and I don't know how many times you've been in the governor's office, but I sat in one room off to the side where there's a big portrait of Abraham Lincoln, and I was talking to the Governor Quinn about something, and you forget sometimes the totality of where you're at. Mm-hmm. And the people that have been there before you, but he was a man that literally, he believed what he talked about. He didn't just say it to say it. And so he was somebody who was approachable. And I always enjoyed the stories when we threw out Rod Blagojevich, and I served on the impeachment committee as special counsel. When we threw out Rod Blagojevich, he would give you his card and would cross out lieutenant and give you. So, I mean, here's a guy who, from a pragmatic standpoint and trying to save money, would do something like that. And I think on the other side, you have to look at leaders. I served under Leader Cross, more of a moderate suburban candidate, Leader Durkin, who was more of a moderate. But these are suburban people, and so they gave me the opportunity to be in leadership. And I learned from suburban moderates, and I also learned from friends like David Rice, who know as a lobbyist, and from some of the downstate folks that I served with. That take you under their wing to teach you the different portions of the state. And I think also knowing the state as well as I do know, having served, that brings some value that I don't have to catch up on. Plus, I know where the bathroom is, and I don't know where my office is going to be because I know that Stratton's under construction. So we'll see if that works out.
Wow, I didn't know you were on the Blagojevich impeachment. I'm sure that there's some short stories you could share about that. I mean, the guy is just such an enigma and just such a character. And I think that's what makes him so unique is I think so many people knew that he was such a BSer, but man, even after he got impeached, I mean, I listened to him for an hour on the Megyn Kelly show, and he's funny, and he's likable in the sense that, like, you have this family friend who comes to the house every once in a while, and he's full of crap, but he's just got these stories, and you're like, I know this guy's not a good person, but he's enjoyable in the sense that he makes you laugh, and I think that's so much like Blago.
It is, and so I had a chance to meet him, and when I came in is when he won, and he is a very captivating person. He's very charismatic, very charming person. So I can understand why people voted for him. But I also watched what he did from a legislative side when he avoided the legislature and put in kids care and Medicaid for the All Kids program. He would use the stroke of a pen and amend the budget and say, here, it's free rides for seniors. It's free rides on the RTA and CTA. And I remember being at home right before Thanksgiving meal and going, oh, the governor just did this. I'm like, how is he doing this stuff? And then I remember getting the call from the caucus on a special call from Leader Cross that we were going to Springfield to impeach the governor. And it was 2-3 weeks before Christmas. And so it's like session never ended. And Blagojevich kept us in session. So you look at these different leaders, and I always find it interesting that Republicans want to listen to Blagojevich now, because I don't. I know what he did, and he started the state into a downward spiral. Mm-hmm. Instead of using the charisma for good, he chose a whole different direction.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You think about the pension holidays, and you sell it, and everybody's like, oh, holiday, I like that. I like the sound of a holiday. And then now you flash forward, here we are, nation's second largest unfunded pension liability. Well, thanks a lot for the holidays.
Exactly. So we used to talk about this on the House floor. It's like you own a home, you have the average person has a 30-year mortgage, and you just don't pay in year 15. But you're going to make interest payments on it on year 31 is when you're going to make all the payments. So it's just like, I'm not going to borrow $10 million today. You took a holiday that costs now hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's these tricks that people used to advance their own agenda in the short term, but there's long-term consequences.
Yeah, that was so eye-opening to me coming in. And, one trick that they love to do is the fiscal year starts in July, so they'll start a program in January, and then in that budget, we only see half the cost. But now for the next year, we're on the hook for that program now for the full year. And so there's a lot of times you'll see a budget like this year's $53.1 billion, but it's really not a $53.1 billion, because if you annualize it, it has more costs than that, but you just got to cover it next year.
Well, don't tell. So why would people want to know about that? That's why they do it. They know the tricks of the trade.
Yeah.
And I listened to the speeches about how this budget has something for everybody, except usually it doesn't have something for the taxpayer, right?
Yeah.
So we've taken care of everybody. But the problem is when you set the tone like that, you do it at 4:00 in the morning. You have all these amendments. And I get people pay legislators to do all that hard work and to be their watchful eye on the budget. But at the end of the day, the complexities are so much that when you try to communicate to the district, you really can't. So $53 billion, as you know, really isn't $53 billion.
Right.
It's really probably $54 or $55 billion. Then when they come in at the beginning of the year and say, here's what we think the revenue is going to be, that's BS too, because they have no idea where it's going to be, or they'll calculate it higher so that it looks like they have more money. And a lot of the state got bailed out by COVID money, because if it wasn't for the COVID money, we were already at, our basically being in junk bond status. So now we will see where the rubber meets the road. You're there now. You see what they're doing. What's their budget shortfall? What's the short and long term? You see that up here, especially, you see public transit in the way of rail and the CTA and buses. That's the next pitfall that the state's facing, and that impacts people here, but not as much as it used to, because a lot of people don't travel into Chicago or back and forth from the suburbs. So they're at a precipice. They're at the cliff again. That was here in 2008. So if you hang around long enough, history does tend to repeat itself. The RTA was in a bad way then. Here we are 17 years later, basically, and I'll be joining you next year to talk about, and I would hopefully give you some insight as to what the General Assembly did back then to solve the problems of the future, because really nothing is new in government.
Yeah, and I appreciate having you back, because people ask me a lot if I'm for or against term limits, and I have a self-imposed 10-year term limit. And I would still probably support them. I don't think 10 is probably the right year, but maybe 14, 16 years. But there's so much value in having people that have been there for a long time. And if you have people that have only been there for a short time, you really are transferring the power to the bureaucrats and to the lobbyists because you don't have people there that know that history. And so I don't think you want everybody sticking around forever. Actually, I think in the Illinois General Assembly, we already have quite a bit of turnover. And it's just such a value to have somebody that can say, hey, I was there in 07 when we made this deal. This is why we made that deal. Don't listen to that government affairs person or that bureaucrat that's telling you otherwise because I've got the history.
That's right. And so that's where we used to turn. So I served with Congressman Mike Bost, who was my seatmate. And I learned about a lot from him because when he came to the General Assembly, he had been there and seen different things, Republican leadership, Democratic leadership. And you would look to him, and I looked at a lot of the old timers, and they would say, here's what we did back under Governor Ryan or under Governor Thompson. This is how we handled this. And this is how we negotiated that. And without that, you have a lot of brand new people that aren't sure. And like you said, the bureaucrats and the lobbyists are in control. They know where everything is because that's their job. You just got there, and now you're asked to make very important decisions. So I think it's important that you have people there with institutional knowledge and wisdom, and that they pass that along because obviously I looked at Henry Hyde, and he gave speeches about term limits, and there's always conversations about it. And to me, the people will term limit you. If you draw fair districts, the people could say, I don't want Reboletti to serve anymore, and that's their decision, right? And if they don't want me, then they'll let me know through an election. But when you have term limits mandated, then you're telling people who they can and can't vote for. If the people don't want you, they have that option, especially in the House. Every 2 years, you're up, right? As soon as you win, you're already out and you're already running for re-election. So that's a good temperature as to, are you doing the job right? Can you help out? Can you provide guidance as to voting and understanding where the state has been? And so I think some of those conversations add value, and I would hope to be able to do that as part of the General Assembly again.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I never really thought about that with, the term limits, that maybe part of the argument for them in Illinois is because our maps are so gerrymandered, where out of 118 seats, maybe 15 of them are really a toss-up seat. Maybe it might only be 10. And if you've only got 10 seats that are contested, maybe you need term limits because the other 108 people aren't going anywhere. But if you really have a competitive map where more like half of the members are really fighting for their seat, the people are the ones that get to make that call.
Right. And so here, this seat's one of the most competitive in the state. It will remain that way no matter what.
How much was it decided by in 2022? I know they had to do.
It was about 300 votes.
Yeah.
And it wasn't decided until, a couple weeks later. Of course, as the ballots keep coming in and get mailed in and go through the U.S. Postal Service. So it is about as purple of a district as you get. And I served in those previously. And so you're constantly taking the pulse of the community. But I look at other districts across the state that are drawn to pack Republicans in or pack a certain amount of Democrats in. And now you don't have the diversity of thought. You don't really have an open election because there isn't. What's the campaign going to be about? So then when you ask people to run for these seats, they're like, well, I can't win that seat, and we don't have the money to put into the seat. So then it goes uncontested. And so now you have all these uncontested seats. And so what do you see in this cycle? You see my seat, another seat out in LaSalle, Peru, and some others that are open seats.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interest. Otherwise, the election's almost been predetermined before you've even had it.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of what people talk about term limits in Illinois is because of the corruption and the gerrymandering. So you're like, get all these other people out. Let's get some new people in there. So I get the demand for term limits. So when you run for election, you put yourself out there. Hopefully the people make the decision that they would like to have me back. I would love to come back and offer my opinion. If not, it's okay because they've had the voice, but they don't have that voice in most of the state.
Yeah. Well, Dennis, I'm looking forward to having you back. I'm hoping that we're going to have a good November coming up here. Before we sign off, any way that folks can follow you on social media or give you money, everybody make sure to give Dennis money. We can win this one, so we got to get him back.
Well, we can win this one. We have polling that suggests that, and we are on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. So if you just look me up under Dennis Reboletti or Reboletti for Rep, you'll find me. We have our website, Reboletti for State Rep. You can find out things that are going on, our up-to-date endorsements, and you can donate any amount of money, and whatever amount you can is greatly appreciated. so that we can have some actual diversity in the House of Representatives by a change in the voices of people that would consider themselves more in the middle.
Yeah, and maybe also real quickly, just where the district is, so folks listening know if they can vote for you or not.
So it's as you know, these are gerrymandered districts, but it runs from it's most of it's most of the city of Elmhurst. It was the largest community. It's about 28% of the district. It goes down Route 83. Those people that know DuPage will know that. And so basically it goes from Route 83 at Grand Avenue, north and 83, which is the area I live in. It goes all the way south to about 63rd Street. Westmont's the largest community of Oakbrook, part of Oakbrook Terrace, and Hinsdale, and it has a little bit of Western Spring. So there's a lot of different cutouts, but if you look, we have a map there, and if you have any questions, you can always contact the campaign.
I mean, just listening to that description of the district, what an argument for fair maps. Anyway, I digress. Dennis, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on the show. We're wishing you luck this.
Travis, I really appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
I'm Travis Weaver, and you are listening to the Good People Project.